Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really personal story about a single year, 1980, that basically laid the groundwork for our entire digital world. And we're going to see it all through the eyes of a student who was right there when it all began.
So let's just start with this question to kind of set the stage. When I say 1980, what does online education even mean to you? I mean, forget about Wi-Fi and the cloud. What did being connected even look like in a world of landlines and rabbit-ear TV sets?
Yeah, the simple answer is there wasn't one. It just didn't really exist yet. The world was still so analog, and the seeds of the life we live now were just, and I mean just being planted. Okay, let's get into this.
We're going to travel back in time with a guy named Morten Paulsen. He was graduating as a cybernetics student in Norway back in 1980, and believe me, his world and how he learned looked completely different from ours today.
So back in 1980, this is what distance education meant. You didn't log in, you didn't have Zoom calls or discussion boards. Nope. Courses were literally delivered through the mail or over radio waves or on TV. It was a total one-way street of information.
So let's really dig into Paulsen's experience as a student, because it paints such a vivid picture of the time. You know, being a tech student wasn't about sleek laptops. It was this very hands-on and often incredibly slow process.
And look, this wasn't just slow, it required a totally different mindset. Today, we're all about moving fast, breaking things, instant feedback. This was the exact opposite. Your feedback loop was literally 24 hours long. Imagine that? A single typo and your entire day's work was basically wasted. It forced you to be slow, deliberate, and perfect.
And even the most cutting-edge personal tech was, well, it was extremely limited. Paulsen's pride and joy, his HP 21 calculator, had just enough memory for him and his friends to program a simple game of Yahtzee. And that was the peak of portable computing power. It's actually a pretty amazing reminder that creativity loves limits. With only 49 lines of code, you had to be so clever to make anything happen.
And this just brilliantly illustrates the speed of everything back then. Paulsen had a vacation job with the state telecom company, and his task was measuring data transfer speeds over phone lines. They started at a crawl, 300 bits per second. And he actually remembers wondering, who on earth would ever pay for a service like this? It's just so hard to see the future when you're standing right in the present, right? That tiny trickle of data he was measuring would one day become the absolute fire hose of information that runs our whole world.
So after graduation, Paulsen does this big road trip across the US. He gets to San Francisco, you know, the heart of this budding tech scene, and he starts asking for directions to Silicon Valley. But nobody knew what he was talking about. Can you believe that? The name that literally defines our entire tech world today was completely unknown to the public back then. That's just how new all of this was. So Paulsen heads back to Norway and starts his master's thesis at a small microcomputer company called Micron. And this move, well, it put him in the exact right place at the exact right time. He basically got a front row seat to a revolution that was about to happen. He wasn't just, writing a paper for his master's. He was literally building a personal computer from its most fundamental parts, the processor, the logic, even figuring out how to save information. And get this, he saved his entire project on a single, massive 8-inch floppy disk. That felt like the absolute height of modern convenience at the time.
Okay, now this is where things get really interesting. See, his colleagues at this little company, Micron, they were working directly with a guy named Gary Kildall from a company called Digital Research. They were developing an operating system called CPM-86, and it was the inevitable winner for IBM's top secret new project, the IBM PC.
This is where the story takes a huge turn. It's like a classic David versus Goliath story. And what's amazing is that years later, Paulsen actually got to ask the one person who could explain what really happened, a very young Bill Gates. So here's the crucial setup. The stage was set for this big battle between two operating systems. You had the established player, CPM-86 from Digital Research, and then you had this new, kind of unknown challenger, which would eventually become MS-DOS, from a little company called Microsoft.
So, in a 1989 interview, Paulsen just straight up asks Bill Gates for the true story. And according to Gates, when IBM first came to Microsoft looking for software, he actually sent them away. He sent them to his main competitor, Gary Kildall. But for reasons that people still argue about today, that critical meeting between IBM and Kildall, it just didn't happen.
Microsoft saw this huge opening and acted incredibly fast. They went out and bought a pre-existing system from another programmer, and it was fittingly called QDOS, the Quick and Dirty Operating System.
And then, under this insane deadline, they re-engineered it into their proposal for IBM.
So Paulson asked Gates the key question, the one everyone wonders about. Was it just a lucky break? You know, if Gary Kildall had just been available for that one meeting, would the entire history of personal computing have turned out completely different?
And Gates' answer was totally definitive. He said no, it wasn't chance at all. Microsoft was determined to win that contract. And they did it by embedding themselves in the whole process, advising IBM on everything from the character set to the graphics. They didn't just sell a product, they made themselves indispensable. It was a masterclass in strategy that honestly countless tech companies have been trying to copy ever since. Okay, so let's zoom out for a second. This huge, pivotal tech story, it didn't happen in a bubble. The year 1980 was a time of massive cultural and political change, and this quiet tech revolution was just brewing underneath all that noise.
So while the future of the PC was being decided in these quiet back rooms, the world outside was loud and chaotic. This revolution, it wasn't born in a vacuum. It was born right in the middle of this really turbulent, uncertain time. And that's the spirit, the zeitgeist, that ended up shaping the entire digital age.
And this is where the story really comes full circle. Remember that difficult, almost rabid, as Poulsen called him, cybernetics professor from the very beginning? Well, he eventually became so celebrated in Norway for his contributions that they put his face on the tail of a Norwegian air jet. Seeing his old professor memorialized on an airplane like that made Poulsen wonder something. In this new online world that he literally watched being born, who are our heroes? Well, the pioneers of online education, the people who build the digital classrooms for millions, will they ever be celebrated in such a big, public way? It's a really fascinating question to think about as we log off.